The ceramic bowl explodes against my forehead. Blood salts my tongue. I fed him from it at 8. Now he snarls, "You don't deserve to breathe." He forged 17 checks and never saw 3 accounts. 847,234 saved 43 years. I'll spend it. First purchase? His handcuffs? For something he never imagined. You don't deserve to breathe. Randy's words hit me harder than the ceramic bowl that shattered against my forehead moments before. Blood dripped into my eyes as I crouched on the kitchen floor, gathering pieces of what used to be my grandmother's soup bowl. The same bowl I'd used to feed him chicken soup when he had fever as a child. But what Randy didn't know, what nobody in that emergency room would discover, is that I had $847,000 hidden in 3 separate accounts. Money I'd saved during 43 years of teaching 3rd grade. Money from Richard's life insurance, money that could buy me justice. And I was about to use every penny to destroy the monster my son had become. My name is Teresa Miller. I'm 65 years old, and this is the story of how a helpless old teacher sent her abusive son to prison for 12 years. I'm so grateful you're here listening to my story. You know, when I decided to share this, I wasn't sure anyone would believe that a mother could do what I did. If you've ever dealt with family violence or know someone who needs to hear that it's possible to fight back, please give this video a like. While I tell you the rest, if you could subscribe to the channel, it would help me reach more people who might need this message. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I want to know how far these stories are traveling. Now, let me tell you exactly what happened when I woke up in that hospital bed 3 months ago. The fluorescent lights felt like needles stabbing my retinas. My ribs screamed with every breath, and the left side of my face was so swollen I couldn't open my eye completely. That's when I saw her. Dr. Sylvia Parker, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much truth to accept comfortable lies. "Mrs. Miller," she said, pulling up a chair next to my bed. "I've been an emergency physician for 22 years. I know the difference between falling downstairs and being beaten with fists. My instinct was to protect him. Even then, even with my blood still under his fingernails, I slipped in the kitchen. I whispered through swollen lips. The floor was wet from washing dishes. Dr. Parker opened a manila folder and spread photographs across my bedside table. My own face stared back at me, purple, grotesque, barely recognizable. But these weren't from tonight. "Mrs. Miller, these photos were taken during your 3 previous visits to this hospital. September 15th, broken wrist from falling off a ladder. October 22nd, dislocated shoulder from tripping over the cat. November 8th, concussion from slipping on ice. Each time you came in alone. Each time you had the same story. The evidence was undeniable. 3 months of escalating violence, documented and photographed. 3 months of my own lies, carefully cataloged. I know you're scared," Dr. Parker continued, her voice softening but never losing its edge of steel. "But Mrs. Miller, the next time he brings you here, it might be in a body bag." That's when something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like ice on a frozen lake, the first hairline fracture that signals everything is about to give way. "He's my son," I said, and the words tasted like ash. "And you're his victim." Dr. Parker called social services within the hour. A woman named Carmen Rodriguez arrived with a briefcase full of forms and a voice that brooked no argument. She'd handled cases like mine before. Too many cases like mine. "Mrs. Miller, we can have your son arrested tonight. The evidence is overwhelming. But you have to press charges, you have to testify, and you have to mean it." I thought about Randy at 8 years old, how he'd curl up next to me during thunderstorms, how he'd bring me dandelions from the yard and call them flowers, how he'd practiced his spelling words at the kitchen table while I graded papers. But that child was gone. He'd been gone for years, slowly dissolved by cocaine and rage and something dark that I'd refused to see growing behind his eyes. What happens if I press charges? He goes to jail tonight, and depending on what else we find during the investigation, he could be looking at serious prison time. I closed my eyes and felt my grandmother's blood still sticky in my hair. The same grandmother who told me at 16, "Teresa, baby, never let anyone make you smaller than you are. Not for love, not for family, not for nothing." I want to press charges. The words came out steady and clear. And for the first time in 2 years, I didn't apologize for existing. Within 3 hours, Oak Park Police had Randy in custody. Officer Jennifer Walsh, a compact woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, sat in my hospital room taking my statement. Mrs. Miller, I need you to tell me everything. Start from when your son moved back home 2 years ago. So I did. I told her about the first time he'd pushed me. Gently. Just a nudge when I'd asked him to help with groceries. How it escalated to shoving when I'd questioned his unemployment story. How the shoves became slaps when I'd discovered money missing from my purse. How the slaps became punches when I'd threatened to change the locks. The soup incident tonight? Officer Walsh said. What triggered it? I served him dinner, chicken noodle soup. He took 1 spoonful and said it was bland. When I suggested he could add salt, he exploded. Over soup seasoning. Over control. It was never about the soup. It was about breaking me down until I was so small, so afraid, that I'd never question anything he did. Officer Walsh's pen moved quickly across her notepad. Mrs. Miller, during these 2 years, did your son take money from you? That's when I opened the floodgates. I told her about the forged checks, 17 of them, totaling $23,400. About the jewelry that disappeared piece by piece, always with elaborate stories about pawning them temporarily for job interviews or car repairs. About the credit cards he'd opened in my name, running up $18,000 in debt before I discovered them. He told me he needed money for job training courses, I said, my voice getting stronger with each revelation. Turns out he was spending $3,000 a week on cocaine. Officer Walsh stopped writing and looked up at me sharply. $3,000 a week? Mrs. Miller, that's over $150,000 a year. Where was that money coming from? From me, from my life savings, from the insurance money Richard left me when he died, from 43 years of teaching and saving every penny I could. The scope of the theft was staggering even to me as I said it out loud. Randy hadn't just been violent. He'd been systematically draining my financial life to feed his addiction. Mrs. Miller, with evidence of this level of financial abuse combined with the physical violence, your son is looking at multiple felony charges. Are you prepared for what that means? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Randy in prison. Randy with a criminal record, the neighbors talking. The shame of having raised a son who beat his own mother. But then I thought about Dr. Parker's words. The next time he brings you here, it might be in a body bag. I'm prepared. Officer Walsh gathered her papers and stood to leave. Mrs. Miller, you should know. We arrested your son at your house. He was in your kitchen, cleaning up the blood and broken ceramic. When we told him why we were there, he said, the old bitch finally grew a spine. Even then, even after everything, that hurt. The casual cruelty of it. The complete absence of love or regret or even basic human decency. But it also clarified something for me. This wasn't my son anymore. This was a stranger who happened to share my DNA, who'd learned to weaponize my love against me. The next morning, Attorney David Carter arrived at my hospital room with a stack of legal documents and a reputation for winning cases exactly like mine. Carmen had recommended him, a specialist in elder abuse with a track record of putting abusive family members behind bars. Mrs. Miller, he said, settling into the visitor's chair with the confidence of a man who'd seen justice prevail more often than not. I've reviewed the police report and the hospital records. This is a strong case, very strong. But I need you to understand what you're signing up for. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a timeline he'd already begun constructing. The prosecution will argue that your son engaged in a pattern of escalating abuse designed to isolate you, control you, and systematically steal your assets. The evidence supports aggravated domestic violence, elder abuse, grand theft, identity theft, and fraud. We're looking at potential sentencing of 10 to 15 years. The numbers hung in the air like a judgment. 10 to 15 years. Randy would be in his 50s when he got out. If he got out. What do I have to do? Testify. In open court. In front of your son. And Mrs. Miller, his defense attorney, is going to try to paint you as a vindictive mother who's exaggerating the abuse. They're going to say you're confused, that you're misremembering events, that Randy was just trying to help manage your finances. I looked at the bandages covering my arms, at the cast on my wrist, at the reflection of my swollen face in the hospital room mirror. Let them try. But what I didn't tell Attorney Carter, what I wouldn't tell anyone for months, was about the 3 bank accounts Randy had never discovered. The accounts where I'd been quietly moving money every time his behavior got worse. Call it intuition. Call it survival instinct. Call it 43 years of teaching children who sometimes lie, cheat, and steal, and learning to recognize the signs. Account number 1, First National Bank of Oak Park, $247,000. Account number 2, Chase Private Banking, $365,000. Account number 3, Community Trust Savings, $235,000. Total, $847,000 that Randy had never touched, never stolen, never even knew existed. Money that would pay for the best legal team available. Money that would ensure justice wasn't just served, but served with a silver spoon. Because Randy had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed that a 65-year-old retired teacher was helpless. He'd confused kindness with weakness, love with submission. And now he was about to learn the difference. The morning after Randy's arrest, I discharged myself from the hospital against Dr. Parker's advice. My ribs were still screaming, my face looked like raw hamburger, but I needed to see what he'd done to my house. What evidence he might have destroyed. What lies he might have prepared. Officer Walsh met me at my front door with a crime scene photographer and a detective named Marcus Thompson, a tall, methodical man who treated my kitchen like an archaeological dig. Mrs. Miller, we've secured the scene, but I want you to walk through and tell us if anything looks different, anything missing, anything that seems wrong. Walking into my own kitchen felt like visiting a crime scene in someone else's life. The blood had been cleaned up, but I could still see the faint stain on the linoleum where my head had hit the floor. The ceramic shards were gone, but tiny glints of my grandmother's bowl still sparkled in the corners. "The cookie jar," I said suddenly, pointing to the empty space on my counter. My ceramic rooster cookie jar. It was there yesterday. Detective Thompson made a note. What was inside it? Emergency cash. Usually about $400. Usually. I checked it 3 days ago. There was $620. They found the cookie jar in Randy's bedroom, empty, shoved under his mattress, along with drug paraphernalia, and what looked like a small scale. But that was just the beginning. "Mrs. Miller," Detective Thompson said, "we need to examine your financial records. Your son claims he was helping you manage your money because you've been confused lately. We need to prove otherwise." That's when I smiled for the first time since the attack. A real smile that made my split lip crack and bleed a little. "Detective, I have every financial record from the past 5 years, organized by month, filed alphabetically, color-coded by account type." His eyebrows shot up. "You kept records of everything?" "I was a 3rd-grade teacher for 43 years. Organization isn't a skill, it's a survival mechanism." We spent the next 4 hours in my home office, a small room off the kitchen where I'd graded papers for decades. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, each drawer labeled with mathematical precision. Checking 2020-2022, savings 2019-2024, insurance and investments 2015-2025. Detective Thompson pulled out file after file, his expression growing more grim with each document. "Mrs. Miller, according to these records, you've had 17 checks stolen and forged in the past 18 months. 17 that I caught," I corrected. "I suspect there were more." He spread the canceled checks across my desk like playing cards. Randy's handwriting was obvious, sloppy, hurried, desperate. The amounts escalated over time. $400 in March 2023, $800 in June, $200 in September, climbing to $2,100 for the most recent theft in November. "The forgeries get sloppier as they get bigger," Detective Thompson observed. He was getting careless, desperate, or more confident that I wouldn't fight back. Officer Walsh found Randy's drug dealer's contact information in his phone. A man named Ice, who apparently delivered cocaine to my house twice a week, always when I was at my book club on Tuesday evenings or volunteer reading on Thursday afternoons. "Your son was having drugs delivered to your address," she told me. Ice told us Randy was one of his best customers, spending between $2,000 and $4,000 weekly. The number hit me like a physical blow. I had to sit down, My hand pressed to my chest as the mathematics of betrayal became clear. 2 to 4,000 per week. That's roughly $150,000 to $200,000 annually, Detective Thompson finished. Mrs. Miller, where was that money coming from? I opened another filing cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled Randy Support 2022-2024. Inside were copies of every check I'd written to help my son, every transfer I'd made, every bill I'd paid on his behalf. The list made me sick to my stomach. Monthly rent payments, $800 x 24 months, $19,200, job training courses, $3,400 car repairs, $6,800 medical bills, $4,200 security deposit for apartment he never rented, $2,500 emergency loans, never repaid, $11,300 credit card payments, $800 groceries and necessities, $7,200 total legitimate support, $62,700, but Randy had stolen much more than what I'd willingly given. Detective Thompson called in a financial crimes specialist, Agent Sarah Martinez from the FBI's Economic Crimes Unit. She arrived that afternoon with software that could trace every electronic transaction and a team that treated financial fraud like murder. Mrs. Miller, we're going to need access to all your accounts, every bank, every credit card, every investment. Your son may have opened accounts in your name that you don't even know about. Agent Martinez connected her laptop to my kitchen table and began what she called digital archaeology. Within 2 hours, she'd uncovered a nightmare I never imagined. Mrs. Miller, your son opened 3 credit cards using your Social Security number. Total debt, $27,400. My hands started shaking. I never applied for any credit cards. He also took out a $15,000 personal loan from Community First Credit Union using forged documents. The loan was approved because your credit score was excellent until he started missing payments. The violations kept mounting. Randy had used my identity to rent expensive electronics, sign up for premium cable packages, even lease a car that I'd never seen. Everything was designed to feed his habit while destroying my financial standing. But here's what's interesting, Agent Martinez said, scrolling through screens of data. Your son only accessed 3 of your accounts. You have other accounts he apparently never discovered. I nodded calmly. 3 accounts. I moved money into them whenever his behavior got worse. How much money, Mrs. Miller? $847,000. Agent Martinez stopped typing. Detective Thompson's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. Officer Walsh actually laughed out loud. I'm sorry, Officer Walsh said. Did you say $847,000? Plus change, $847,234.67 to be exact. The room fell silent except for the ticking of my kitchen clock, the same clock that had witnessed 2 years of Randy's escalating violence. Mrs. Miller, Agent Martinez said slowly, your son stole approximately $100,000 from you over 2 years, but you have $847,000 he never touched. Randy assumed I was just a poor retired teacher living on Social Security. He never imagined I might have planned for my future, or that I might be smarter than a cocaine addict desperate for his next fix. Detective Thompson leaned back in his chair. Where did that money come from? 43 years of teaching salary, carefully invested. My husband Richard's life insurance, $400,000. My parents' inheritance. Rental income from a small property in Wisconsin that Randy doesn't know I own. Decades of saving every penny because I learned early that women who don't have money don't have choices. The irony was delicious. Randy had brutalized me for 2 years, thinking he was stealing everything I had. In reality, he'd taken less than 12% of my actual worth, but what he'd really stolen was something far more valuable. My sense of safety, my trust, my ability to sleep without fear, my willingness to believe that love and blood relationship meant something sacred. Mrs. Miller, Agent Martinez said, with resources like this, you could hire the best legal team in Chicago. You could ensure your son faces maximum penalties for what he's done. I thought about Randy's words from the night before. The old bitch finally grew a spine. He was right about one thing. I had finally grown a spine. Agent Martinez, I want you to prosecute him for everything. Every forged check, every stolen dollar, every lie he told, every bruise he gave me. I want him to understand that actions have consequences. And if he tries to claim you're incompetent or confused, I gestured around my immaculate filing system, my organized records, my careful documentation of 2 years of systematic abuse. Let him try. But even as I said it, I knew the real battle was just beginning. Randy wouldn't go quietly. His defense would try to paint me as a bitter old woman seeking revenge. They'd claim I was exaggerating the abuse, forgetting details, manipulating evidence. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Because Randy had made one final fatal error. He'd spent 2 years training me to be afraid. But fear, I was learning, could transform into something far more dangerous: determination. Attorney David Carter arrived at my house the next morning with a legal team that looked like they'd stepped out of a courtroom drama. 3 associates, a paralegal, and a private investigator named Rebecca Stone, a former Chicago PD detective who specialized in domestic violence cases involving financial crimes. "Mrs. Miller," Carter said, spreading documents across my dining room table, "we're going to build a case so airtight that your son's defense team will spend more time plea bargaining than fighting." Rebecca Stone was a compact woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd brought a recorder, a camera, and an attitude that suggested she'd seen enough family violence to last 10 lifetimes. "Mrs. Miller, I need you to walk me through every incident of abuse, starting from the very first time Randy put his hands on you. Every detail, every witness, every excuse he gave, every lie you told to cover for him." We spent 6 hours reconstructing 2 years of systematic terror. Rebecca recorded everything, occasionally stopping to take photographs of locations where violence had occurred. The kitchen where the soup incident happened, the living room where he'd shoved me into the coffee table, the stairway where he'd helped me fall down 3 steps. "The pattern is textbook," Rebecca explained. "Isolation first, cutting you off from friends and activities, financial control second, making you dependent on him while actually stealing from you. Physical violence third, escalating from pushes to slaps to beatings, and always, always making you believe it's your fault." But as Rebecca dug deeper into Randy's background, we discovered something that made my blood freeze. Bomba 1, the research. "Mrs. Miller," Rebecca said, looking up from her laptop with an expression I couldn't read, "I've been investigating your son's online activity for the past 3 days. What I found is disturbing." She turned her computer screen toward me. "Randy's search history from the 6 weeks before the soup incident. How long does it take to get inheritance after parent dies? Can you contest a will if parent was mentally ill? How to prove someone has dementia? Average life expectancy for 65-year-old woman. How to get power of attorney over elderly parent? Signs of Alzheimer's disease. Legal requirements for involuntary commitment, Illinois." The list went on for pages. Randy hadn't just been stealing from me. He'd been researching how to take everything I owned legally. "He was planning to have you declared incompetent," Rebecca said quietly. "The beatings weren't just about control. They were about creating a medical record that would support a claim that you were suffering from cognitive decline." My hands started shaking as the implications became clear. Every fall, every accident, every emergency room visit, Randy had been building a case that I was a confused old woman who couldn't take care of herself. "There's more," Rebecca continued. "I found text messages between your son and someone named Marcus DeLuca, apparently his drug dealer. Randy was telling him that he'd have a big payday coming soon, and that he just needed to wait for the old lady to have an accident." The nausea hit me like a physical blow. I ran to the bathroom and threw up everything I'd eaten that day. When I came back, Attorney Carter was on the phone with the district attorney's office. "We need to add conspiracy charges," he was saying. "This wasn't just domestic violence. This was attempted financial fraud with premeditation." But Rebecca wasn't finished with her investigation. Bomba 2, the insurance policies. 3 days later, Rebecca called me with news that made the conspiracy charges look like misdemeanors. "Mrs. Miller, I need you to sit down. I've been digging into your son's financial activities, and I found something that changes everything." She arrived at my house an hour later with a briefcase full of documents and an expression that promised bad news. "Randy took out 2 life insurance policies on you, both within the past 18 months. Total value, $250,000. The words hit me like ice water. "I never signed any life insurance policies." The signatures are forged, badly forged. But here's the thing. Both policies have a 2-year contestability period. After that, they pay out regardless of how you die, as long as it's not obvious suicide. Rebecca spread the policy documents across my kitchen table. Randy's forged version of my signature was sloppy, desperate, nothing like my careful teacher's handwriting. Mrs. Miller, your son has been paying premiums on these policies for 18 months. The contestability period expires next month. After that, if you die under any circumstances, Randy gets $250,000. The mathematics of murder became crystal clear. Randy hadn't just been planning to steal my savings. He'd been planning my death. The beatings were getting worse, I said slowly, the pieces falling into place. More frequent, more violent. Classic pattern. He was escalating toward what would look like an accidental death, a fall down the stairs, a slip in the bathtub, a heart attack brought on by the stress of repeated accidents. Attorney Carter immediately contacted the FBI. Agent Martinez returned with a team of specialists and a warrant to search Randy's belongings more thoroughly. What they found in his bedroom made national news. Hidden inside a hollowed-out textbook, detailed floor plans of my house, including measurements of the stairway, notes about blind spots where security cameras couldn't see, and a timeline counting down to the insurance contestability deadline. He'd been planning this for over a year, Agent Martinez told me. Mrs. Miller, your son wasn't just an abusive addict. He was a potential murderer. Bomba 3, the second victim. But the investigation revealed something even more horrifying. Rebecca's background check on Randy uncovered a previous relationship with a woman named Patricia Henley, age 58, who had died in an accidental fall at her home in Milwaukee 14 months earlier. Patricia had met Randy through a dating website. She'd been a widow with substantial savings. Patricia died 3 weeks after Randy moved in with her, Rebecca explained. Cause of death was listed as accidental. She supposedly fell down her basement stairs while doing laundry. But guess what? Randy was the sole beneficiary of her will, which had been changed just 2 weeks before her death. The parallels were terrifying. Patricia had been isolated from her friends. Her neighbors reported hearing arguments and sounds of violence. She'd been seen at a local emergency room twice in the months before her death, once for a sprained wrist, once for a bruised rib from falling off a stepladder. Milwaukee PD reopened Patricia's case as a homicide investigation, Agent Martinez informed me. Your son is now a suspect in her murder. Randy hadn't just been planning to kill me. He'd already killed before. The realization that I'd been living with a murderer for 2 years made me physically ill. Every time he'd raised his hand to me, every accident he'd caused, every escalation of violence, it had all been practiced for the main event. Mrs. Miller, Attorney Carter said, your son is now facing charges in 2 states. Here in Illinois, aggravated domestic violence, elder abuse, grand theft, identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. In Wisconsin, first-degree murder. The legal machinery that had seemed so slow and bureaucratic suddenly shifted into overdrive. The Cook County District Attorney's Office assigned their best prosecutor, Maria Santos, a woman who'd built her career on putting dangerous men behind bars. Mrs. Miller, Prosecutor Santos said during our first meeting, this case is no longer just about domestic violence. Your son is a serial predator who targets older women for their money. You're not just a victim, you're a survivor, and your testimony is going to put him away for life. The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming. Not just justice for me, but justice for Patricia Henley. Justice for whatever other victims Randy might have targeted before Patricia. Justice for the women he'd target in the future if he ever got free. But I was ready. More than ready. Building the case. The prosecution team worked around the clock for 6 weeks, building what Prosecutor Santos called the most comprehensive elder abuse case in Illinois history. They interviewed my neighbors, who testified that they'd heard screaming and sounds of violence coming from my house, but had been too afraid or indifferent to intervene. Mrs. Geneva next door admitted she'd seen Randy carrying out boxes of my belongings and loading them into his car on multiple occasions. They examined every financial record, creating a visual timeline that showed exactly how Randy had systematically drained my resources while planning my murder. The evidence filled 3 bankers' boxes and required a projector to display in court. They brought in medical experts who testified about the pattern of my injuries, how each accident had been designed to look plausible individually, but formed a clear picture of escalating abuse when viewed together. Dr. Sylvia Parker became our star witness. She'd photographed and documented every injury, every inconsistent story, every sign that pointed to ongoing domestic violence. In 30 years of emergency medicine, Dr. Parker testified during a pretrial hearing. I've never seen a clearer case of systematic abuse. Mrs. Miller's injuries told a story of increasing violence that was designed to end in her death. But the most damning evidence came from Randy himself. The FBI had obtained a warrant to tap his phone calls from jail. Randy, apparently believing that attorney-client privilege protected all his conversations, had been remarkably chatty with his public defender. "Look, she's old and confused," Randy had said during one recorded call. "Half the time she doesn't remember what happened. Just play up the dementia angle and this whole thing goes away." In another call, "The insurance money was supposed to set me up for life. Now I've got to figure out how to beat this thing. And the most damaging of all, I should have finished the job that night with the soup. One more hit and it would have looked like a stroke." Attorney Carter played those recordings for me in his office. Hearing my son's voice, casual and cold, talking about murdering me like it was a business transaction, finally killed whatever remained of my maternal instincts. "He's not my son anymore," I told Carter. "I don't know what he is, but he's not my child." The plea bargain attempt. 2 weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, Randy's defense attorney, a harried-looking public defender named Thomas Brennan, approached our team with a plea bargain offer. "My client will plead guilty to domestic violence and theft charges in exchange for dropping the conspiracy to commit murder and removing the Wisconsin murder charges from consideration." Prosecutor Santos didn't even blink. "Your client is facing life in prison without parole for conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder in Wisconsin. We're offering him nothing." "Mrs. Miller," Attorney Brennan appealed directly to me, "surely you don't want to see your own son spend the rest of his life in prison. He's sick. He needs treatment, not punishment." I looked at this earnest young man who genuinely believed that family love should trump justice. "Mr. Brennan," I said calmly, "my son stopped being my child the first time he forged my signature to steal my money. He became a stranger when he started beating me, and he became my enemy when he started planning my murder. I want him prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." "But he's your family." "No," I interrupted. "Family doesn't try to kill you for insurance money. Family doesn't research how to have you declared incompetent. Family doesn't practice murder on other victims before coming for you. Randy stopped being my family the night he told me I didn't deserve to breathe." The plea negotiations ended there. The final preparation. As the trial date approached, I underwent intensive preparation with the prosecution team. They needed me to be strong, credible, and unshakable under cross-examination. "Mrs. Miller," Prosecutor Santos explained, "the defense is going to try to portray you as a vindictive mother seeking revenge against a troubled son. They'll claim you're exaggerating the abuse, that Randy was just trying to help you manage your finances, that the insurance policies were legitimate planning for your future." How do we counter that? With facts, with evidence, with the truth, and with your testimony delivered clearly and without emotion. You can't seem angry or bitter. You need to seem like exactly what you are, a retired teacher who documented everything and made rational decisions based on overwhelming evidence. I practiced my testimony for hours. Rebecca Stone played Randy's defense attorney, throwing hostile questions designed to rattle me. "Isn't it true that you were increasingly forgetful and confused?" "No. I maintained detailed financial records throughout this period." "Didn't you give your son money willingly to help him get back on his feet?" "I gave him specific amounts for specific purposes. He stole additional money through forgery and identity theft." Isn't this really about a mother who couldn't accept that her adult son needed independence? This is about a son who beat his mother and planned her murder for insurance money. I was ready, more than ready. But what I wasn't prepared for was the phone call I received the night before the trial was scheduled to begin. "Mrs. Miller, this is Detective Williams from Milwaukee PD. We've arrested your son's accomplice in the Patricia Henley murder. and he's agreed to testify against Randy in exchange for a reduced sentence. The accomplice was Marcus DeLuca, Randy's drug dealer and apparently his partner in targeting vulnerable older women. Mr. DeLuca has provided detailed information about how your son selected victims, gained their trust, isolated them from support systems, and planned their deaths to look accidental. Mrs. Miller, your son isn't just a killer, he's a serial killer who specializes in elder women. The magnitude of what I'd survived and what I'd helped stop hit me like a tidal wave. Randy had killed Patricia. He'd planned to kill me, and without my decision to fight back, he would have killed again. Tomorrow, justice would begin. The Cook County Courthouse was a circus on the morning of October 15, 2024. News vans lined the street, reporters clutched microphones, and photographers jostled for position as I walked up the stone steps in my navy blue suit, the same one I'd worn to Richard's funeral, but today it felt like armor. Randy sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled, his face gaunt from months of jail food and cocaine withdrawal. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I felt nothing. No maternal love, no pity, no regret. Just the cold satisfaction of a teacher watching a cheating student finally face the consequences. Judge Patricia Morrison called the court to order with the gravity of someone who'd presided over hundreds of domestic violence cases, but rarely seen one this methodical, this calculated. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Prosecutor Santos began her opening statement. This is not a case about family dysfunction. This is not a case about a troubled son who made mistakes. This is a case about premeditated murder, systematic financial fraud, and the calculated torture of a 65-year-old woman by the person who should have protected her most. She gestured toward Randy, who kept his eyes fixed on the table. The defendant researched his mother's death. He planned her murder. He practiced on another victim. And he would have succeeded if Teresa Miller hadn't been brave enough to fight back. Randy's defense attorney, Thomas Brennan, countered with exactly the strategy we'd expected. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a tragedy of family miscommunication. Randy Miller is a sick man, a drug addict who made terrible choices while trying to care for an increasingly confused and isolated mother. The prosecution wants you to believe this was premeditated murder, but the evidence will show it was a family in crisis, misunderstood by outsiders who don't know the full story. I almost laughed. Misunderstood by outsiders, like Dr. Parker, who'd photographed my injuries, like Detective Thompson, who'd cataloged Randy's forgeries, like Agent Martinez, who'd uncovered his insurance fraud. The prosecution's case unfolded like a masterpiece of evidence. Dr. Parker testified about the pattern of my injuries, each photograph more damning than the last. Detective Thompson walked the jury through Randy's systematic theft, every forged check projected on screens for the courtroom to see. But the moment that changed everything was when Prosecutor Santos called Attorney Carter to read my financial records. Mr. Carter, she said, please tell the jury about Mrs. Miller's actual financial position at the time her son was claiming she needed his help managing her money. Carter adjusted his glasses and opened a thick folder. The courtroom fell silent except for the whisper of turning pages. Mrs. Miller's total assets as of September 2024. First National Bank of Oak Park. Checking account, $47,234.67. Chase Private Banking. Investment account, $365,000. Community Trust Savings, High Yield Savings, $235,000. Wisconsin Rental Property, current market value, $127,000. Richard Miller Life Insurance Beneficiary Account, $200,000. The numbers hung in the air like accusations. Several jury members visibly straightened in their seats. Total net worth, $974,234.67. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Randy's head snapped up for the first time, his mouth falling open as the reality hit him. Mr. Carter, Prosecutor Santos continued, how much money did the defendant actually steal from his mother? Based on our analysis, forged checks totaling $23,400, credit cards opened fraudulently, $27,400, personal loan obtained with fake documents, $15,000, cash theft, approximately $8,200, total, $74,000. So the defendant tortured his mother for 2 years, planned her murder, and forged insurance policies to steal her life savings, when in reality he had stolen less than 8% of her actual wealth. That's correct. Randy's lawyer objected. Relevance, Your Honor. But Judge Morrison overruled him. The defendant's financial motive is absolutely relevant, Mr. Brennan. The jury needs to understand what the defendant thought he was stealing versus what he actually could have inherited. The irony was devastating. Randy had brutalized me for years, thinking he was stealing everything I had when my hidden accounts contained 13 times more than he'd managed to take. But the moment that sealed Randy's fate came when Prosecutor Santos called Marcus DeLuca to the stand. DeLuca was a thin, nervous man with the hollow eyes of a longtime addict. He'd agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence in the Patricia Henley murder, and his testimony was about to destroy Randy's life. Mr. DeLuca, how did you meet the defendant? Randy was my customer, bought cocaine from me twice a week for about 2 years. Did the defendant ever discuss his living situation with you? Oh yeah, all the time. He lived with his mom, said she was loaded but too stupid to know what money was worth. He was always talking about how he was going to get rich when she died. Randy's face had gone white. His attorney was scribbling furious notes. Did the defendant ever discuss specific plans regarding his mother's death? Yeah. He said the old lady was going to have an accident soon. Said he'd been practicing on some widow in Milwaukee. Figured out how to make it look natural. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison banged her gavel for order. Mr. DeLuca, did the defendant tell you about Patricia Henley's death? He bragged about it. Said it was easier than he thought. Push her down the stairs, wait for her to die, collect the money. Said his mom would be even easier because she was smaller. Several jury members looked physically sick. One woman in the front row was crying. When was the last time you spoke with the defendant about his plans? 2 days before he got arrested. He said it was going to happen that week. Said he was tired of waiting, tired of her being alive. That's when the courtroom doors burst open. 2 U.S. Marshals entered, followed by Detective Williams from Milwaukee PD. They walked directly to the prosecution table and handed Prosecutor Santos a folder. Your Honor, Prosecutor Santos announced, the prosecution has just received additional evidence from Milwaukee PD. The defendant has been formally charged with the first-degree murder of Patricia Henley. Wisconsin has issued a warrant for his arrest. Randy began hyperventilating. His attorney requested a recess, but Judge Morrison denied it. Mr. Brennan, your client is in custody. He's not going anywhere. We'll continue. When I was finally called to testify, the courtroom was packed. Randy's eyes followed me as I walked to the witness stand, but I didn't look at him. I looked at the jury, 12 faces representing the justice I'd been denied for 2 years. Mrs. Miller, Prosecutor Santos began gently, please tell the jury about the night of August 23, 2024. I took a deep breath and began with the soup. How Randy had exploded over something so trivial. How he'd thrown the ceramic bowl at my head with enough force to knock me unconscious. How I'd awakened in my own blood, staring at pieces of my grandmother's bowl scattered across the linoleum. What went through your mind when you woke up in the hospital? That I was going to die if I didn't fight back. That Randy had stopped being my son and become my enemy. That love without respect isn't love at all. It's just fear wearing a mask. When Randy's attorney cross-examined me, he tried every trick in the book. Mrs. Miller, isn't it true that you were having memory problems? I pulled out a small notebook from my purse. Mr. Brennan, I've kept a daily journal for 6 years. Would you like me to read you what I wrote about our conversation yesterday? Or perhaps what I had for breakfast on March 15, 2023? Isn't it possible you misunderstood your son's intentions? I opened the folder Attorney Carter had prepared and began reading Randy's own words. August 1st, 2024. Text message to Marcus DeLuca. Just need to wait for the old lady to have an accident. August 10th. Should have finished the job that night with the soup. August 18th. One more hit and it would have looked like a stroke. Mr. Brennan, which part of planning my murder did I misunderstand? The defense attorney's questions became increasingly desperate, increasingly irrelevant. When he suggested that I was a bitter mother seeking revenge, I looked directly at Randy for the first time since the trial began. I'm not bitter, I said clearly. I'm grateful. Grateful that I survived. Grateful that Patricia Henley will finally get justice. grateful that no other mother will have to endure what Randy put me through. Randy's composure finally cracked. He stood up at the defense table, his shackles clanking. "You don't know what it was like," he shouted. "Living in that house. You made me feel like nothing, like I was worthless." Judge Morrison ordered him to sit down, but Randy kept screaming. "I gave you everything. I took care of you, and you never appreciated anything." That's when I stood up in the witness box and delivered the words I'd been preparing for months. "Randy," I said in my teacher voice, calm, clear, final, "you gave me nothing but pain. For 2 years you stole my money. For 2 years you stole my peace. For 2 years you stole my ability to feel safe in my own home. You researched my death like a homework assignment. You practiced murder on another woman. You planned to kill me for insurance money and then claim you loved me." My voice never wavered, never broke. "I spent 63 years loving you, supporting you, believing in you. You spent 2 years planning my murder. We are not the same." The courtroom was dead silent, except for the sound of Randy crying, ugly, desperate sobs that sounded nothing like remorse and everything like self-pity. Judge Morrison called for order and dismissed me from the stand. As I walked back to my seat, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd gotten revenge, but because I'd finally told the complete truth. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and faced Judge Morrison with the gravity of someone announcing a death sentence. On the charge of aggravated domestic violence, guilty. On the charge of elder abuse, guilty. On the charge of grand theft, guilty. On the charge of identity theft, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. Randy collapsed into his chair, his public defender's hand on his shoulder. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following month, but she addressed Randy directly before dismissing the court. "Mr. Miller, in 30 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such calculated cruelty toward a family member. You will serve 25 years to life in Illinois, and then you will be extradited to Wisconsin to face murder charges. You will likely never be a free man again." As the bailiffs led Randy away, he looked at me one last time. No anger now, no defiance, just the hollow realization that actions have consequences. I walked out of that courthouse a free woman for the first time in 2 years. 6 months after Randy's sentencing, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in my new apartment in Evanston and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Gone was the gray hair pulled back in the tight bun I'd worn for decades. In its place, soft silver waves framed my face, cut in a modern style that made me look 10 years younger. The reading glasses were new too, stylish frames that Rebecca Stone had helped me pick out, replacing the wire-rimmed ones Randy had broken during one of his rages. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was the way I held my shoulders, straight, strong, unafraid. My apartment overlooked Lake Michigan, and every morning I drank coffee on the balcony, watching the sunrise paint the water gold. The rent was $2,800 a month, more than I'd ever imagined spending on housing, but I could afford it. I could afford anything now. Because Randy had been so spectacularly wrong about my financial situation, the irony still made me smile. The phone rang as I was getting dressed for my speaking engagement at Northwestern University. "Doctor," Parker's voice was warm and familiar. "Teresa, I saw the Tribune article about your talk tonight. How are you feeling?" "Ready," I said, adjusting the navy blazer I'd bought specifically for these occasions. "More than ready." The article Dr. Parker referenced had run that morning with the headline, "Teacher Turned Survivor. Local Woman Helps Others Recognize Elder Abuse." My photo showed me speaking at a community center, my hands gesturing confidently as I addressed a room full of seniors and their families. I'd given 18 talks in the past 4 months. Churches, community centers, senior living facilities, university criminology classes. Each time, I shared my story and watched faces in the audience recognize patterns in their own lives. The subtle isolation, the financial manipulation, the escalating violence disguised as family concern. Mrs. Miller, a woman named Grace, had approached me after my talk at St. Mary's Catholic Church the previous week. "My grandson has been asking me to sign papers, giving him access to my accounts. He says it's just in case something happens to me, but after hearing your story, trust your instincts," I'd told her. Loving family members discuss financial arrangements. They don't pressure you into signing documents you don't understand. Grace had called me 3 days later to report that she'd discovered her grandson had already forged her signature on loan applications. She'd pressed charges. That was the real victory. Not Randy's conviction, satisfying as it was, but the ripple effect. Every person who recognized the warning signs, every victim who found the courage to fight back, every family member who learned that love without respect isn't love at all. My phone buzzed with a text from Attorney Carter. Randy's parole hearing denied. Won't be eligible again for 10 years. Wisconsin trial scheduled for March. Randy was serving his 25-year sentence at Menard Correctional Center, 3 hours south of Chicago. I'd received exactly one letter from him in 6 months. A rambling, self-pitying screed that blamed me for his situation and demanded I put money in his commissary account. I'd thrown it away without finishing it. But today brought different news. Marcus DeLuca had been sentenced to 15 years for his role in Patricia Henley's murder. His testimony against Randy had ensured both men would spend the best years of their remaining lives behind bars. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't just about punishment. It was about prevention, about making sure the violence stopped with me. The Northwestern University lecture hall was packed when I arrived that evening. Criminal justice students, professors, social workers, and a surprising number of seniors filled every seat. A local news crew had set up cameras in the back. "Good evening," I began, my voice carrying easily to the back of the room. "My name is Teresa Miller, and until 8 months ago, I was a victim of elder abuse. Tonight, I want to tell you how I became a survivor. I'd refined my presentation over dozens of talks, but I never read from notes. The story lived in my bones now, each detail seared into memory by the pain it had once caused and the purpose it now served. I talked about the progression of abuse, how it had started with small criticisms and evolved into life-threatening violence. I explained the financial manipulation, showing copies of Randy's forged checks and fraudulent loan applications. I discussed the psychological warfare, the way he'd isolated me from friends and convinced me that his behavior was somehow my fault. But most importantly, I talked about the decision to fight back. The moment I pressed charges, I told the audience, I stopped being a victim and became a survivor. Not because the bruises healed or because Randy went to prison, but because I chose to value my own life more than his convenience. During the question and answer session, a young criminology student asked, "Mrs. Miller, do you ever regret sending your own son to prison?" The question used to hurt. Now it just revealed how little some people understood about toxic relationships. "I didn't send Randy to prison," I replied calmly. "Randy sent Randy to prison. I simply refused to continue enabling his violence by staying silent about it." After the talk, I drove home through streets that no longer felt threatening. My new neighborhood was safe, quiet, filled with the kind of people who nodded hello when we passed on the sidewalk and minded their own business otherwise. I donated $200,000 to the domestic violence legal clinic that had provided additional support during Randy's prosecution. Another $150,000 had gone to the Patricia Henley Memorial Fund, which helped elderly victims of financial fraud. The money felt better spent on justice than it ever had sitting in secret accounts. In my kitchen, bright, modern, nothing like the scene of Randy's violence, I made a simple dinner and reflected on how much had changed. Patricia Henley had gotten justice. Randy would likely die in prison. Marcus DeLuca would spend his 50s behind bars. 36 people had contacted me after my speeches to report their own experiences with elder abuse. Most importantly, I'd learned that strength isn't about enduring abuse. Strength is about refusing to accept it. As I settled into bed that night, I thought about the soup that had started everything. How Randy's rage over something so insignificant had finally shown me who he really was. How the absence of salt had revealed the presence of poison in my own home. I'd spent 2 years walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace, trying to love someone back to humanity. Now I knew better. Some people can't be loved back to decency. Some people choose violence and call it family. Some people mistake kindness for weakness until the moment they discover their mistake is permanent. Randy had taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about respect. And I'd finally learned to respect myself enough to demand the same from others. The woman who'd cowered in fear for 2 years was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting free. And I was finally, completely, joyfully free.